Hey, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, and glad to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video all over the place, and ready to have some fun with you. A little bit on CBS Sports today, some very interesting things to say about Kirby Smart, and look, some of it may be fair, some of it may not quite be fair. We'll kind of explain all of that. Also, more hype starting to grow for Georgia Clemson. We'll tell you about all of that over the course of the next few minutes. Very interesting remarks from a Georgia commit last night with Jeff Centella before the Edge was presented by Kroger. And if that's not enough, our buddy Terrence Edwards is going to stop by and say hello to us there as well. So we're going to try to cram it all in for the next few minutes. Glad to have you with us for it. Dog Nation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Meriwether and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of Dog Nation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DogNation.com. This is Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I have to admit, it is with a heavy heart I do today's show. I coach my son's 9-year-old baseball team, 9 and 10-year-old baseball team, and our season came to an end last night in our tournament. But you know what? Fun times all the way around, and a really good season, and nowhere else you'd rather be than on the baseball field on a beautiful spring night. So I know many of you are doing the same kind of thing right now, so hope you're enjoying all of that, and we certainly appreciate you being with us here today for Dog Nation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Let me begin this way today. One of the things we've talked a lot about over the course of this offseason is the seemingly growing narrative that it's now or never for Georgia when it comes to winning a national championship. It's national championship or bust, put up or shut up, whatever else you want to say about that. And I think that we have done a pretty good job on this show of kind of walking through the ways in which that's not quite accurate for Georgia here this year. The championship window does not close whether Georgia wins the national championship this season or not. That's not quite the way that goes down. It's going to extend well beyond this. However, that is not to say there isn't a little bit of growing pressure on Georgia to step up and to do more. Kirby Smart made that phrase famous, a couple of years ago, and the idea that Georgia wants to do more in that regard right now, it's not unfair to say that, even if this isn't quite championship or bust for UGA this year. With that in mind, I thought it was very interesting that CBS Sports, in their collection of writers, they do this every year. I like lists. The off-season time of year is a good time for lists, and all that's really fun. And in their list, they've now put out of the top coaches in college football, Kirby Smart comes in with a lofty ranking at number 7. That's pretty high compared to the 130 coaches that coach college football, but it is lower than he was a year ago. And in the midst of explaining why Smart is 7th on this list and not higher, CBS kind of gives you some pretty stern words about the way their collection of writers, Tom Fornelli is the guy that's collecting all these words, but it's the rest of the team there kind of weighing in on all this. The writers there at CBS kind of give you some pretty stern words about how at least this aspect of the national media, how they kind of view Kirby Smart. Let me show you this on the screen here when it comes to what CBS says about Georgia and the fact they have Smart ranked 7th as their top coach in college football. But Tom Fornelli says, we're starting to see our voters reach the point where Kirby Smart needs to show them more, he says. You can only be a title contender for so long without winning one before patience wears thin. That's Tom Fornelli saying patience is wearing thin with Kirby Smart. Time for him to show us more. Time for him to kind of take that next step towards getting back to college football playoff or winning the national championship, whatever that kind of next step is sort of viewed to be for Kirby Smart. And I don't think it's unfair to say, okay, now it's time to do a little bit more. There was a little bit of program regression, over the course of the last couple of years. As we've kind of cited before, Georgia went from being in the playoff to, losing close in the SEC championship game to losing in kind of, blowout fashion in the SEC championship game in 2019 to not even making the title game last year. That's the wrong progression that you want to be on when it comes to that for Georgia. I don't think it's wrong to acknowledge that in 2021, given all that Georgia seems to have going for it right now, that it needs to be better than that this year. It needs to be more than that this year. It's time to do that. Now, I would say it's not past time and it's not, championship or bust, window's about to close. It's just simply time. It's just simply time for that to happen. Georgia to have a better season this year than it has had the last couple of years. I don't think many Georgia fans would think it's unfair for CBS to say that either. That there's a little bit of restlessness for Georgia. This is well-earned restlessness over a number of decades leading up to this, but it is time for Georgia to be better this year than it's been the last couple of years. However, what I don't like, and I think this is something else that I think the Georgia fans will agree with me on, using a list like this to cite it as some sort of example of Kirby Smart being lesser as a coach than maybe other Georgia fans want to believe him to be. This is the thing that I think a lot of media and a lot of non-Georgia fans simply get wrong about Kirby. This idea of somehow he's deficient as a coach, or somehow he hasn't proven himself over the course of his first, 6 years, I guess, as a head coach there at UGA. The fact that he hasn't, done more, I guess we're going into the 6th year or whatever, but the fact that he hasn't done more than he has, somehow that's some sort of blight against his resume. And the truth is, the CBS list that I just cited as an example of is as much proof as you need for exactly what Kirby Smart has done as Georgia coach going back to 2016. If you look at Smart's ranking on this list, only at number 7, I think you can make a case that's actually too low for Smart. He ought to be higher on this list, if for no other reason than the fact that Smart's got 4 head-to-head wins against guys who are ranked ahead of him. Jimbo Fisher's a spot just above him at number 6. Jimbo does have a college football national championship, so maybe that's the reason why he gets that nod over Kirby. But Smart has the head-to-head win over Jimbo going back 2019. Brian Kelly comes on this list at number 5. The CBS writers fall all over themselves to praise Brian Kelly, but the fact of the matter is Kirby Smart beat Kelly twice just in the last few years. Beat him in Athens in 2019, went into his own stadium up there in South Bend, took the place over, painted it red, and walked out of there with a win, back in 2017 there as well. The idea that you would rank Brian Kelly ahead of Kirby Smart on a list like this, I honestly don't know how you get there, given the fact that Notre Dame's claim to fame are college football playoff appearances built on the back of a bunch of wins against nondescript, unimpressive foes, but when matched up against the very best teams in the country, teams that come from the SEC or teams that have a similar level of talent, the Fighting Irish never show up. Kelly's ranking on a list like this is built almost exclusively on the back of the meager schedule that a team like Notre Dame collects its wins against. And then you talk about Lincoln Riley at number 3 on this list. Media types just love Lincoln Riley because he scores a bunch of points and he gives a bunch of quotes and all kinds of stuff like that. But we saw these two guys head to head. Lincoln Riley had the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback Baker Mayfield. Lincoln Riley had the big halftime lead. But the brilliant coach, number 3 on the CBS list, could not hold that halftime lead against Kirby Smart in the Rose Bowl at the end of the 2017 season. Smart got that head-to-head win. The only, knock on Kirby Smart on the basis of this is the fact that he has lost 3 times to Nick Saban. But if we're only judging coaches as successful compared to what they've done against Nick Saban, then there are a lot of coaches in college football who are going to end up being lacking on a list like that. I mean, all told, if I'm doing the math right in my head, if you look at the top 10 coaches in college football, the other 9 other than Smart, with Dan Mullen coming in at number 10 on this list, Smart's record against the top 10 coaches, according to CBS Sports, is actually 7-4 head-to-head, and that's for a guy who's only been a head coach since 2016. Now, I'm not telling you that's enough, and I'm not telling you that Georgia fans ought to be satisfied with that alone, but I am going to tell you that's a pretty good start for a head coach at this point in his tenure as a head coach, and I would say the best is still yet to come. The CBS folks would say, it's time for some of that stuff to start happening in 2021. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But the fact that so much has happened for Smart, beating Dan Mullen 3 times, winning a Rose Bowl against Lincoln Riley, being in multiple SEC championships, having an SEC championship to call his own, making the college football playoff, I would say that's enough evidence for me to believe that Smart could be well on his way to satisfying those critics who are tapping their watch and saying, when's the next big moment going to come for Georgia? I understand where that impatience comes from, but I've seen enough from Smart to lead me to believe he's going to deliver on that eventually. All right, so let me shift gears here and talk about something completely different for a moment, because I thought we had a really interesting day yesterday on SEC Country Live. Every Wednesday, 3 p.m. on the SEC Country video channels, SEC Country on Facebook, SEC Country Live on YouTube. Always a fun time there. And we had, speaking of CBS Sports, we had Chip Patterson from CBS Sports on the show yesterday. We're talking about the Georgia-Clemson game. And Chip had two very interesting, although in some respects different things to say about this game, and I think it adds to the conversation that we've been having here on this program for quite some time about why it is going to be so big. However, one of the things that Chip Patterson from CBS Sports said on SEC Country Live yesterday, which I think is kind of interesting, is that actually maybe if you're the loser of this game, that there's actually a way that you can come out of a game like this, season opener versus for if you're Clemson playing Georgia or Georgia playing Clemson, even stronger than you otherwise would have been. This is an interesting point of view about what happens to the other team in this Georgia-Clemson game. Here is Chip Patterson from CBS Sports.
I can't wait, and I'll tell you this. There's an interesting proposal on the table. I was not the one who started it, but I do think that it is something to consider. Is you take the loser of Clemson, Georgia, and you pick them to win the national championship. And you do it for two reasons. Number one, it's going to be the best price that you're ever possibly going to get on whoever loses. And number two, there is a motivational edge that you're going to get where Clemson, for example, is going to be huge favorites in every game they play. Georgia, in most games they play, not all. And all of a sudden, the sense of urgency is just ratcheted up. Now, you could exhaust yourself, and it could end up backfiring, but there's something to be said about the way that it sharpens your focus.
I think that's interesting what Patterson says there. However, I have to admit, I don't completely agree with that. I've said before that I think it's a misnomer that the loser of this game is still just as much of a national championship contender as they were before, as Chip says, maybe the team that you ought to bet on because of the price that you'll get on the heels of that. You know, for Georgia, we've seen what happens when you're fifth best team in the country, SEC runner-up. You have a tendency to get left out of the college football playoff. Texas A&M also dealt with that a year ago. Left out of the college football playoff. That you want to bolster your resume for the playoff before you get there if you play in the rugged SEC. And for Clemson, who we've seen in the playoff year after year after year, the fact of the matter is, if they were to suffer another loss to Georgia after not looking great in last year's college football playoff, you start to wonder if the reputation that Dabo Swinney's established for that Clemson program, you start to wonder, does that start to erode a little bit? And all of a sudden, just winning the ACC alone, as meager as that is, all of a sudden that's not enough to make people believe you are, top dog, bull of the woods type stuff anymore. And in fact, the person who maybe proves that point as much as anything is something else that Chip Patterson said yesterday on SEC Country Live, that if you want to make the comparison to, what Georgia Clemson reminds you of to start the season, that it's a lot like another season opener we saw just a couple of years ago, and we all now know and remember what happened to the loser there in that game. Don't disregard what happens to the loser in this game. In fact, the recent past maybe kind of proves that to you. Chip Patterson once again.
The first thing that comes to mind is Alabama, Florida State 1-3 going into it in the preseason. And it's so funny because it ruined Florida State. I think that game, obviously you lose your starting quarterback to injury in that game. Everything changed for the Seminoles. But, we had just watched Clemson take the throne from Florida State in 2015. Fall short against Alabama, but with that ridiculous Deshaun performance in that game. And we came into the next season thinking, all right, that was cool, Clemson, that was cute, but Florida State, it's time to take the title back. And they're going to make a run at Alabama. And they're going to get a crack at them. And will we see it again in the college football playoff? And then that is the end of Florida State's run, is that game right there. So I'm not hoping that the loser of Georgia Clemson ends up having their entire run broken, but it can be dramatic when some of these top programs clash.
It is easy to forget how on top of the college football world Florida State was. The aforementioned Jimbo Fisher, the coach there at the time, 2013 national champions, a team in the first college football playoff of 2014, and then getting ready to play Alabama a couple of years after that to open the season. DeAndre Francois as your quarterback. Going to think you're going to be, right there alongside Clemson near the top of the ACC, and yet you get beat up by Alabama. You lose Francois to injury, and the Seminoles have not been the same since then. It's very easy to forget just how quickly all of that changed for Florida State around that time. And obviously I would not suggest that's a possibility for Georgia here, nor would I probably suggest it's a possibility for Clemson. But I think it does remind you that the stakes are actually higher than some people think for this Georgia-Clemson game, that the loser of the game doesn't just shake it off and marches its way on to the college football playoff as a 12-1 type team. College football is not as easy to predict as that you give up all your margin for error when you lose a game like this for that season. In the case of Florida State from a couple of years ago against Alabama, you also kind of lose some of the prestige that kind of keeps your program afloat. So make no mistake about it. When these two teams clash, as hyped a regular season opener as we've seen in a good number of years, and along the list of greatest season openers of all time, make no mistake about it, there's a lot on the line for both teams. The winner has a lot to gain. The loser, unfortunately, has a lot to lose, and it's one of the things that makes college football so much fun to watch. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is Dog Nation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, radio at noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DogNation.com. Really glad to have you with us. Big thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp for making it all possible. Your source for Georgia divorce. Here's what that means. If you know divorce is the next step for you, you've tried to avoid it, you maybe tried to kind of work your way around it, but now it is just unmistakable that the thing that you need to make the next season, the next chapter of your life happier and better is that divorce process, then please put smart people to work for you to help you take those steps, make the right decisions, fully weigh all the choices and options that are available to you. That is what Merriweather and Tharp can do for you. As I said, that next season of your life can be made better by how you handle things in this season right now. So trust Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. You can set up that initial consultation, which is a conversation. You can set all of that up, and they can kind of explain everything, walk you through it, and then you make the decision to put them to work for you, and they will do good work along the way to making you whole again, whether it be relationship with family, children, finances, all the things that you have to consider in a situation like this. They can do all that for you. Your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. My friends at Merriweather and Tharp. All right, let's go around the doghouse here for a moment today before we talk to Terrence Edwards in just a couple of minutes' time, the great former Georgia wide receiver. Looking forward to being able to do that. Very interesting last night on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Now, before I kind of let you hear what happened, let me kind of set this up a little bit this way. When four-star wide receiver Denalon Morissette announced his commitment to UGA a couple of weeks ago, one of the guys who jumped in there on social media in the comments section to celebrate that was the very impressive five-star, call him a defensive end, you call him linebacker, whatever you want to call him, Jeremiah Alexander out of the state of Alabama, one of the top players in the country, obviously for this upcoming class. And Alexander was very happy for Denalon Morissette. In fact, this is what he said in the comment section to what Morissette put out there on Instagram. Can we show the Jeremiah Alexander thing here? Very interesting, saying that basically wherever Denalon, yeah, there you go. Wherever he's going to go, I'm going to go, says Jeremiah Alexander there on social media on the event of Denalon Morissette announcing his commitment to Georgia. So if you're a Georgia fan, you see that. Not only are you getting a very good receiver in Morissette, you've got this guy Alexander saying, I'm going to follow this guy on to the University of Georgia. Now listen, we've been around the block a few times around here. We know a lot of times these kinds of things have a way of sounding good when these recruits are going through the recruiting process, but sometimes these friendships don't quite lead to the kind of package deal type stuff that sometimes we kind of wish that it was. But it was interesting last night when Denalon Morissette made an appearance with Jeff Sintel on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. That statement right there of Alexander saying, I'm going to go wherever Denalon Morissette's going to go. Morissette sounded last night like he very much believes Alexander and takes him at his word. In fact, this is what Morissette said about that.
Oh, yes, sir.
Where does that come from? I mean, how are you linked up with that kid in Alabama?
Man, it's just we got connections everywhere. We've been top players know each other. That's all I can say. Just top players around the country know each other, and we're gonna pull them in though for sure.
Do you think Georgia has a chance with him, and why?
Oh yeah, yes sir. Me and him, we be on the phone, so I definitely do. I can't say why. I don't want to tell his business, but I definitely do.
What kind of addition would he be to the class if he did choose Georgia?
If he do choose Georgia, we'll stay number one class. So I hope he does.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, and I like the idea of staying the number one class. I also like the phrase that Morissette uses there of top players know each other. That's one of the things I think we've all come to understand here over the course of these last few years, that group texts and social media chatter and everything like that, these guys do. They connect with each other, and they do have relationships. Even guys like Alexander, who else from the state of Alabama, Morissette obviously from Georgia, you still get to know each other. You still develop those connections. And obviously, Georgia has leaned on other recruits to help recruit other guys a lot in recent years. Alexander would be a gigantic pull, one of the top players in the country at any position. out of Alabaster, Alabama there. And Denallen Morissette seems to think his relationship with Alexander gives UGA an inside track on that. That's a nice thing to think about there, and it's fun to hear Morissette recruiting as hard as he is for UGA. That is Around the Doghouse. Terrence Edwards coming up here in just a moment. Before that, though, let me remind you about what's going to go down for us tomorrow. Now, we're sold out, so for those of you who are going to be there with us, can't wait to enjoy our Dog Nation Days of Summer event at the Terrapin Tap Room that afternoon. I think we start at 4 p.m., doors open anyway. Enjoying some dinner, some Terrapin beers, and then rolling right into that Braves game against the Pirates tomorrow night. First of all, how about last night? Ronald Acuna Jr. thrilling walk-off win for him. You love the gestures he gives after he hits that home run. That's great stuff to see, and it's going to be a great time tomorrow. Our Dog Nation Days of Summer event. So many of you have said, can't wait to see Dog Nation get back together. This is the first of many of those for us. We're going to do this tomorrow. Then we got some fun announcements for those of you who could not quite get in on our Dog Nation Days of Summer event for tomorrow. Trust me when I tell you, especially as you start heading towards September 4th, we got some big stuff on the horizon to announce and tell you all about. So we'll look forward to doing that. And big thanks to Atlanta Braves for all the hospitality they've shown us as we get ready to do Dog Nation Days of Summer at the Battery Atlanta and Truist Park tomorrow. Terrapin Tap Room, Braves, Pirates, Alumni Weekend. Great time all the way around there around Truist Park with the Atlanta Braves. Good stuff there. Can't wait for that. All right. There is a lot still to do on today's program. Long list of SEC news I want to cover before the show is done. But for now, on everything else happening around UGA, including some of the stuff that Mike Griffith told us about yesterday, about a really pretty fun offseason workout situation going on, let's talk to our great friend, the great former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards here on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DogNation.com insider.
Always a great pleasure to get a chance to talk to Terrence Edwards. Really good stuff from him every time we get a chance to chat. And, of course, the guy that follows this program closely, knows the scene around college football very well. Also, Terrence, thanks for being back on the program today, and I hope that you are doing well.
I am doing well. Thanks, B.A., for having me.
Hey, let me ask you this real quick before we kind of get into anything else. We were just hearing some audio from Denallen Morissette a moment ago, the four-star wide receiver, the UGA commit. How well do you know Denallen? Have you seen his game? What can you tell us about Morissette as a player? Put up big numbers last year at Brookwood High School. He's actually made the transfer over to North Cobb, another good program here, another prolific offense they'll have a chance to kind of shine in. What do you think about Morissette as a player?
Oh, I think he's fantastic. I've watched him grow when he was first at Marietta as a freshman with Jermaine and Eric, that whole crew. So I've watched his game develop and grow over the years. And one of the things that I can say about him, and I don't use this word loosely, he is a straight dog on that field. Like, he plays with a defensive mentality. He plays with a attitude. He plays with a chip that's very controllable. But he makes plays at the end of the day. So I love his game.
I've heard some people almost make that comparison to a guy like, say, Kearis Jackson, another physical-type receiver who you can almost see playing a different position. Not to say that Kearis is not a very good receiver, but he's kind of got that, a little bit of extra, edge to him that you could say, well, he can almost play a couple different positions. Morissette seems to remind some people of that a little bit, too. Is that something you would also say that maybe kind of cut from that same mold of Kearis Jackson a little bit?
Yes, in the sixth up, he's tough. Kearis Jackson is. I'm a little biased on Kearis because we are from that Middle Georgia area, and I just believe that Middle Georgia area just breeds tough football players. But Denallen is one of those guys that he's tough, and you can hit him, he's going to get back up, and he's going to talk to you until you hit him again. He's a little bit bigger. He's a little bit bigger than Kearis, and probably a little bit more straight line speed. But games are very similar.
So when you're coaching with these receivers, and you work with a lot of receivers, obviously, and that willingness to take contact, especially going across the middle, and obviously the slot receiver position has become a spot in the SEC where a lot of yards are there to be gained. You see big time play from slot receivers now, but you do have to have that willingness for contact. You got to be okay with that. Is there a way that coaches can coach that into players? Or is that the kind of thing you're either born with or you're not?
So there's two parts there. Back 10 years ago, and I don't want to call myself the old man on the porch right now, but you had to worry about the contact that we had to worry about when I played, and that's not that long ago. But nowadays, man, with the the contact and getting, you can't hit below the head. You got a certain space. Yeah, a lot of guys don't worry about that anymore because they know they are protected. So they don't have to worry about a guy coming down like I did and getting smacked going across the middle. Now I don't worry about it because those hits are less and less, and they're trying to get it out of the game. So you don't have to focus on this big safety coming down like I did at practice with Thomas Davis and Sean Jones and Terrell Vieira. You don't have to worry about those guys coming down anymore, smacking you around because it's not allowed to. So guys don't have to worry about that, so they're more freely to run across the middle and not worry about getting hit as hard as we used to get hit.
Yeah, you ever go back and show some of those clips to some of the young guys you work with, Thomas Davis, Greg Blue, some of your former teammates at Georgia? I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but the game has changed so much since then that, I mean, they'd put those guys in jail for some of the stuff they were doing legally on a football field, back in the early 2000s. I'm sure some of the young guys that you work with, I'm sure that's a pretty eye-opening experience to see the way that, Blue and Davis, guys like that, used to just lay the lumber during these Georgia games.
Yeah, I actually felt sorry for guys, defenders, during the game, because we felt that those guys were out doing practice. Trust me, it wasn't a pretty sight for the receivers because, those guys was what you call some true head hunters. So we had to endure that punishment in practice. And it was kind of fun, actually, to see them, other receivers, endure that type of punishment. But guys don't have to worry about that anymore. Blue type of player is extinct now because you can't do that anymore. You can't hit a guy like Blue used to hit guys and Thomas and Sean Jones and Terrell Vieira and all those guys, Jermaine Phillips. Man, we had a bunch of those guys back there. So, so you don't have to worry about them anymore. I wish I could play in this area. Maybe I wouldn't have to worry about it either and have a couple more yards on my resume.
I like to think about that. So yesterday, Mike Griffith, who always worked with us here at Dog Nation, had written about and talked here on the show. But the fact that a lot of these Georgia, mini receivers, running backs too, have kind of gone out to California where JT Daniels calls home, and they're out there. I hope they're having a good time and enjoying some of their summer, but also getting some workout in and some timing, some chemistry stuff. Guys that well, like Jermaine Burton, of course, are there. How valuable do you think that is when these guys are able to get away from maybe the distractions of Athens and have some friendship time together, enjoying, some hometowns and home states for some of the guys that know a little bit about California or lived there before they came to UGA, but also getting a chance to work on football? How valuable do you think that is?
It's valuable. I mean, just more than football. They go out there and just enjoy each other. You go out, you can't. That's one of the things I think we were so tired of in 2002 because we all hung together. All the whole receiving corps hung together. Then we hung with DJ. We hung with David Green. But now JT is bringing his guys to his environment, to his state, and that goes a long way for his leadership. And when you have a guy that's going to bring you out and they're going to throw, they're going to just eat, they're just going to fellowship, it goes a long way once you get into the trenches and it's late. The belief that the quarterback to receiver is going to have is going to be tremendous.
I like the word you use there, fellowship, because something else that kind of came up in the midst of all this is, and Terrence, I won't pretend to be an expert on what's gone on over the course of the last 12 months around Georgia or the other college football programs we talk about, but I know it's been hard. I know there were a lot of teams that were really fatigued by the end of last year. All the COVID protocols that you had to go through, and we all understand why those existed, global pandemic, everything else, but it was just a hard thing to endure. And I think it becomes easy to assume, and Terrence, maybe you saw this with your own, high school team that you coach or the players that who you're helping there as well, that maybe you didn't feel quite as close to your teammates a year ago because everybody's masked up and everybody's socially distant. You can't, you feel like you're going to get in trouble for hanging out with guys because, obviously one person come in contact with somebody else, leads to the potential of multiple players being quarantined in the event somebody tests positive. That there was so much need for distance last year, but distance kind of creates, a lack of closeness amongst the players that, we've heard Georgia talk about this a lot during the spring practice that, hey, close teams are successful teams. We got to bring this team close together. To me, that makes a lot of sense that whatever you can do this offseason to kind of, create some fellowship, to recreate the bonds that maybe existed for this team prior to COVID, rebuilding that after there was this necessary requirement to keep the players distant from each other. I'm guessing, Terrence, that's probably a fairly important part of this offseason right now.
Oh, most definitely. just speaking to a lot of those guys that, you can only have so many guys working out together. So you couldn't really never have the whole team there at the same time. You really had to do it in segments. So now with these guys being able to go out to California and just fellowship, like the word that I use, go out there and find their cohesiveness, go out there and find their rapport, go out there and just understand how each guy would like to run routes. Just know JT haven't been the starter, haven't practiced with these guys very much because he was injured. So now he has these guys the whole summer. He's the guy. Now he has to figure out each and every receiver because they're all different. He has to find out their mannerisms, when they're going to break, how they want their balls on deep balls. Does Justin Robinson, because he's the biggest, like jump balls? Like, he has to figure out these guys, and this is the first step to figuring out all his receivers are having them out in California together.
All right, let me say squeeze in one quick thing before we let you go. Georgia also adds an interesting transfer name, Brandon Turnage, former defensive back from Alabama. Not a guy that's played a ton, but this is like a top 100 recruit coming out of Oxford, Mississippi. Had a lot of SEC offers, and listen, he joins a lot of other talented players in this UGA secondary, and we'll have to wait and see how this competition works out. But, Terrence, to me, there's an argument to be made that, Georgia gets better by having Turnage on the roster, and we'll just sort of have to wait and see how the battle for that playing time and those starting spots works out. What did you think of UGA adding Turnage into the mix here?
Well, the only thing I really know about him after doing my research is he's long, tall-wise, long arms, and can run. So if you fix that category, I think the coaches can really use you, even if that's on special teams being a gunner. I think they would find a role for him, and he adds depth. We haven't seen him play much, but one thing I do know, he practices against 4 first-round receivers every day. So going into that Clemson game, not saying he will be successful, but he won't be scared of the Clemson receiver because he faced arguably probably the best receiving group in college football history.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think that's a pretty good endorsement there for what he might have a chance to eventually do at Georgia there as well. Hey, Terrence, before we let you go, remind folks how they can get in touch. Always great training options available. Next generation of pass catchers, guys who want to do it, and be better as wide receivers and guys catching footballs. How can they get in touch with what you're doing with your personal coaching?
You can find me on all social media at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. That's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Terrence, thanks for your time. I really appreciate you being here today, and hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you so much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, great stuff there from Terrence Edwards, the terrific former Georgia wide receiver. I love his analysis of Turnage and kind of everything else, and that kind of former players' perspective on why getting current Georgia players together out in California where they kind of are right now, why that's also really valuable. I think that's really, really good stuff from Terrence Edwards all the way around. Now, speaking of good stuff, you've heard me tell you about the Finish Long drink, and this is such a great beverage as we head towards this spring and summertime because it is ready to drink right out of the can. So a lot of folks doing pool parties, a lot of folks just getting ready to be, patios and just really just outdoors and just enjoying life here this spring, this summer. As you see on the screen, for those of you watching on a video, you got 4 great options of the Finish Long drink to enjoy here today. Whether it's the original, it comes in the blue can. It's got like a citrus flavor. It's almost like a grapefruit hint, but you also have like the gin flavor that kind of goes along with it. It's literally like a cocktail ready to drink coming right out of the can. A really, really great flavor. There's a cranberry version. There's a long drink zero, which obviously is 0 carbs, 0 calories. That's a really fun thing. There's a long drink strong, which is 8.5% alcohol by volume. Gives you a little extra kick. You like the idea of that. That comes in the black can. It is just an enjoyable thing. Great story. If you go to thelongdrink.com, you can actually read the story about this. This is a beverage that's been popular in Finland forever. And, I'm talking about going back to like the 1950s. And then you all kind of work your way, up to how it arrives in the United States. And now it's kind of worked our way to Georgia. And obviously, you hear me talking about this and you say, well, where can I pick some up? That's the great thing is like it's actually available a lot of places now, a lot of bars in Athens. Very popular there. I live kind of more in the Atlanta suburbs. You can find it around where I am there now, too. So the best thing for me to do is just tell you to go to thelongdrink.com, and you can actually find it for yourself there. Thelongdrink.com, and you can kind of figure out how you can get involved with that there and enjoy some here this spring and summer. Everybody who I've introduced this to, they've all enjoyed it. They like the idea of the the liquor kick to go along with the kind of nice flavor, ready to drink right out of the can, the citrus flavor that kind of goes along with that. They like the idea of that, or the cranberry, or whatever choice you want to make. Everybody that I've turned it on to has really enjoyed it. So thelongdrink.com, and you can enjoy that for yourself here today. All right, SEC through. You don't normally hear me say good things about Florida, but I will say something good about Florida right now, and the fact that they are now out in front of some of the other SEC teams and saying, hey, the Swamp, we're ready to welcome back 90,000 fans into the Swamp. Now, I actually feel sorry for that 90K, that's the brand of college football they're forced to endure. But let's show this on, there you go. 90K strong back in the Swamp. Gators football puts there on Twitter. Since Florida's made this announcement, South Carolina has also made a similar announcement. We expect, obviously, Georgia to follow suit with this. Georgia obviously welcome back full crowd at Foley Field starting tonight against Ole Miss and working their way through the weekend there. So that's all going to be good. But you really get the sense that the world of college football is working its way back to normal, and that's a great thing to think about there. So not a lot of praise for Florida on this show, but the fact they are ready to go. Full stadium, 90,000 strong there in the Swamp. A good sign that everybody else is going to be doing the same thing. We had not mentioned this before on the show, but probably need to kind of squeeze that in just to kind of bring some closure to the story. When Major Burns, the former Georgia defensive back, announced he was entering the transfer portal, the large assumption was that he would be going back to his home state of Louisiana to play for LSU. That assumption became reality here this week. You see the graphic, once again, if you're watching on video, returning home to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, going to LSU. Burns says, let's work. This is an LSU team that has some spots to fill right now. They have lost a lot over the last couple of years, whether it be, a huge collection of guys onto the NFL. They've had a gigantic number of draft picks. They've also had some opt-outs and some transfers, some things like that. So there's a lot of new faces around the LSU program. It's an opportunity for Burns, clearly, but it's also an obligation for the post-Bo Pelini era there as defensive coordinator, the disaster that was, to kind of rebuild, figure out what you have going on there. I do kind of have LSU as an improved team this year, but that's an improved team looking to lean on some new faces, I guess Major Burns included, assuming the SEC kind of ends its prohibition on immediate eligibility for interconference transfers. Most of us assume they will. Obviously, Georgia, by bringing in Brandon Turnage, would seem to believe the same thing. Over in South Carolina for a moment, you may remember Marshawn Lloyd, running back that was seemingly, had Georgia as, one of the schools that were involved in his recruitment there for a while. Chooses South Carolina. It was a big recruiting win for Will Muschamp. But then Lloyd got hurt last year and really missed his first year in Columbia. Nice video put out on social media this week of Lloyd doing some cutting and some running. Looks like he's on his way back to full health there, and that's a great thing to see. I think Lloyd's a back that I can root for, and obviously we root for everybody that's injured and looking to get on the mend to get back fully healthy. The other thing I'll say about the Beamer situation here is that when you look around the new coaches in the SEC, Beamer would seem to be the one who just doesn't have much of an identity right now, compared to Josh Heupel. I don't think that Josh Heupel is going to be particularly successful at Tennessee, but he does have an identity. It's an offensive-minded coach. He's a guy that, former great quarterback, kind of a quarterback-friendly head coach, and that's his identity. Brian Harsin in Auburn, his identity is that here's a guy that has won a lot at that Group of 5 Boise State level, kind of proven himself there, and now he's coming to the SEC looking to do the same thing. Shane Beamer, by comparison, just doesn't quite have the same level of credentials. Now, that doesn't mean he'll be less of as a head coach, but he just doesn't have quite the same credentials. He hasn't been a coordinator. He's a guy that doesn't have that obvious calling card. In fact, really the only thing we do know about him is his famous last name. Oh, this is Frank Beamer's son. But boy, that only goes so far in terms of really, demonstrating what you want to be as a head coach. So when you look at the way that, prior to Beamer's arrival at South Carolina a year ago, Gamecocks actually ran the ball with Mike Bobo's offensive coordinator better than they had. Now Marshawn Lloyd potentially coming back from injury. This is a way for Beamer to maybe establish an identity for himself as a guy who wants to play a tough brand of football there at South Carolina, run the football, something they haven't done well, prior to last year in a number of years. That's an opportunity there for Beamer, and we'll see if he's able to kind of construct an identity around that. A couple of more SEC through stories I want to get to. We have told you about TJ Finley. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Hank South reporting for 247sports.com that Finley potentially in the mix for Alabama. This is a surprising thing for me. Not something I expected us to be saying, and I guess I still largely assume that Finley will go somewhere else. But interesting reporting coming from 24/7 Sports that right now, Finley potentially considering Alabama there. I thought this was kind of a funny video. We showed this to you yesterday on SEC Country Live. It comes from QB Country. You see two SEC quarterbacks working out together here, and you see this sometimes during the offseason, but it's Harrison Bailey and Bo Nix. And the comparison I made yesterday, if you're a Tennessee fan, do you like the idea of Bailey working out with Bo Nix? And conversely, if you're an Auburn fan, do you like the idea of Nix working out with Harrison Bailey? It's almost like, when your kids are high schoolers, you say, I don't want you to hang out with this guy because we think he's a bad influence on you, but the parents of the other guy are telling him the same thing about your son or daughter or whatever else. You sort of wonder, Nix and Bailey both have not had perfect starts to their college careers here. Which guy is going to kind of rub off on the other there. However, if you told me right now I could buy stock in one of these two, Nix, the entrenched starter at Auburn, Bailey, not even a guarantee to start at Tennessee, I believe I would still probably take Bailey as the guy with the higher upside in comparison to Nix right now. And frankly, I think one of the mistakes that Heupel has made is bringing in so many transfer quarterbacks there to Knoxville when, maybe just taking one of your young guys, a guy like Bailey, who was a pretty big recruiting win for Jeremy Pruitt when he got him, who put up big numbers at Marietta, building your program around one of your younger quarterbacks would seem to be the better long-term play. And if you say, well, Harrison Bailey's not that guy, then choose Keaton Salter or whoever else. But just, assuming that Salter comes back from suspension, of course. But at a certain point in time, just build yourself around, one of those guys. And so interesting to see Nix and Bailey working out together there, and we'll see what the outlook is for both those guys in the SEC this season. Auburn got some good news yesterday. Donovan Kaufman, former Vanderbilt safety, made his transfer announcement. He chose Auburn over Texas. That was the other school that was kind of thought to be in the mix for Kaufman there, making that announcement yesterday afternoon and choosing Auburn. And look, for a lot of these, I mentioned the three new coaches, or at least the three that we care about. I won't count Clark Lee in this for a moment. But between, Harsin and Beamer and Heupel, they all inherit programs that have a lot of open roster spots. And how that transfer portal gets used during this offseason is going to go a long way towards determining, just how respectable you can be on the field here this year. I would say that Kaufman's a pretty good ad for Auburn there, and obviously maybe kind of a must-get situation given the fact that he already had the connection to Derek Mason. But if it was a must-get, Auburn did end up getting it. By the way, speaking of that for Auburn, they also got other transfer news in the hardwood. As you're probably aware, KD Johnson, the former Georgia player, has now landed at Auburn there as well. So for the second time this week, Georgia fans forced to endure one of their players leaving to go somewhere else in the SEC. It was Severe Wheeler going to Kentucky earlier. It's KD Johnson going to Auburn right now. And listen, the transfer portal in basketball is just a disaster. There, 1,500 names or however many there in that portal, and obviously Georgia's kind of dealing with the wrong end of that right now. But we'll see what Georgia's able to add to replace so much of what they lost here this offseason. Let me also really quickly before we wrap things up today give a quick shout out to my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, proud partners of UGA, good friends of ours at Dog Nation Daily. For your foundation waterproofing needs, they're the ones to turn to. They are a solutions-based company, and they can solve your problem. 2 full-time engineers on staff. Very easy to get in touch with for all your foundation waterproofing needs. Just simply give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That number, once again, 678-ESOG now for Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And as we wrap up here today, we like to do our Gator Hater roll call. We give out our golden shoe for great Gator haters or just good Georgia fans, or really some days it's just sort of whatever we feel like making it be. You may remember a couple of weeks ago we honored Tennille Calvino, one of our Facebook viewers, because on Facebook you have this top fan status, and Facebook gives it, Facebook takes it away. Nobody really knows how or why you earn top fan status, but Tennille wanted to make it a little bit more, I guess, substantial, so she had top fan Dog Nation hats made up, and she's been giving them out to some of our other Facebook folks. Well, one of those Facebook folks, Jermaine King, actually got his Dog Nation top fan badge hat. Now, this is something this is not an actual official thing from Dog Nation. This is what Tennille had made up. But Jermaine says, I just got my hat. Hopefully the Facebook police won't show up at my door and take it from me. Very fun stuff from Jermaine. You are our golden shoe winner for today. How about a Gator Hater countdown? 163 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville, gets a winner of those lousy, stinking Gators. Have a good day, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Dog Nation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one to trust for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can find them online today at rsandrews.com. All right, let's get some comments here. Let me do, I think, Facebook first today. Let's see what else. Hope everybody's doing good, by the way. Having a nice time. On Facebook. Keith Olds wants his hat. You better talk to Tennille about that. Randy Hall says, how about a golden Top Fan hat on your desk? I like the idea of that there, too. Clarence Dawson wondering about those badges. Greg Baker, happy for both Tennille and Jermaine. Yeah, it's really fun stuff. Oh, Philip Jordan Wells says Tennille is selling them. Well, listen, I'm not out here to knock anybody's hustle. I'm not out here to knock anybody's hustle. Bill Sanders says, always great to be a Gator hater. You better believe that. Great indeed. Good to see Isaac Cruz checking in. Let's see what else is going on. Jermaine King says, oh, no, give this award to Tennille. No, Jermaine, you get the award. Yours was a very nice tweet, very good picture. I'm always happy to do that. Tennille Cavino says it's going to charity. You listen, Tennille, whatever you do, your side hustle is your business. I got no reason to get involved in that, but that is a nice gesture all the way around. Thank you for Dana Turk checking in. Rich Olenek checking in here there as well. How's everybody else doing? Calvin Sanders asked a good question. He says, what do you think is going on with the men's basketball team? Could it be player character, Crean too tough on the guys? That's a really good question. Calvin, I guess one of the assumptions I kind of make is that I think we've created a scenario now in college basketball where it's in college sports in general, where it's very easy. If things aren't good, well, let me try to go to a place where it's better, right? I mean, obviously Auburn was in the Final Four a couple of years ago. You can make a case that, that program's closer to winning again, and maybe Katie Johnson sees it that way. If I'm gonna be pushed to work hard, if I'm gonna be pushed to be better, then why not go and do it at a place where it seems like it's gonna be more fun, or you better have a better chance of winning. Certainly, Severe Wheeler may have thought that about going to Kentucky, and so that's one of the reasons why I've been kind of slow to criticize Crean through all of this, is because I just think we've made it really easy to try to avoid adversity. And I understand why people want to do that. It seems like you're doing right by players by giving them a lot of freedom, a lot of choices. But the honest truth is, in life, you're typically happier by, fulfilling your responsibility more so than, chasing after every, potential freedom you could have. So I don't know. I mean, what was it Terrence said a moment ago, the old guy on the porch? I guess this is the moment where I'm sort of the old guy on the porch, that I would be in favor of a little bit more restrictive recruiting process, or I should say transfer process. Not one that completely restricts transfers, because I think there's some room for players finding a chance to go play. I don't like the idea of being held hostage forever. But, the notion that the moment any adversity strikes, you try to use the transfer portal to your advantage, I find that to be a little bit of a setback for the sport. I do. So I don't know. I mean, like the one thing that, some people like Mike Griffith cited this in the show yesterday. Well, on average, everybody's got 6 guys in the transfer portal. I guess the one thing I'd ask about that, though, is in Georgia's case, it seems like it's like I think it was 7 for Georgia. Maybe it's more than that. But whoever it is, it's like the top guys on the roster. It's Severe and Tamani Kamara and Katie Johnson. It's the guys that, for those who are fans of the team, these are the ones that you've kind of, been rooting for. These are the players that certainly your kids, they're watching Georgia basketball. These are the guys that they've kind of come to know on this roster. It's the top players who've chosen to move on. And I'd be curious to know how much it seems like everybody's got transfers, but is it the top players from these other teams who are transferring? Now, I guess the case of Walker Kessler from North Carolina, it was, but I don't know. I would say that where we are right now in college sports with upwards of 1,500 names in the basketball portal. I think it's 2,400 names or so in the football portal. That's just too much. It's too much because there's only a couple hundred roster spots open in football. And, there's only, a few thousand spots available on any college basketball. I mean, there are 400-something Division I teams, which, leads you to, several thousand roster spots. But, I mean, I don't know. It's just like, I'm just not happy with how all this is working out right now. Randy Hall says poor response by Coach Crean on losing KD. Yeah, the only thing I'm willing to say clearly on this, I really don't know if what's happening to Georgia is more of a product of the current state of college basketball or if it's something that's specifically wrong with Georgia. I'm kind of open to anybody's opinion on that. I don't know that I have an opinion. The one thing that I do believe clearly, though, is you can't throw guys under the bus who are leaving. I think that hurts you in future recruiting. I just think it's the wrong thing to do. When a guy like KD leaves, you can't say we think it's good that he's leaving. I just think that's not a good look, in my opinion. Be my preference not to do that. Jermaine King says, here's a name to cheer for. He says, Cario Oquendo, he one of the basketball transfers he's going to be a star. And so that's the other thing, and Jermaine brings this up, and that's right, is that, there is a chance that what Georgia brings in through the portal, those guys can play and perform well, and, maybe Georgia can be a competitive team with the new faces who are coming in. That's certainly a possibility. I'm glad that Jermaine said that. Lucy Bowers-Boykin on the idea of the NCAA not enforcing rules across the board, still thinking about what happened to Luke Ford a couple of years ago. Yeah, a lot of that Luke Ford stuff has kind of been what has, the NCAA is very sensitive to PR flack. And when you have a guy like Luke Ford and you kind of handle that situation the way you do, there's a lot of negative press that comes the way of the NCAA for that. And so a lot of this idea of, we're just not going to enforce any rules. We're just going to let people do whatever they want. A lot of that, I would believe, is an overreaction to the negative press that the NCAA got because it didn't have a very sensible response to certain transfers like Luke Ford and things like that. Whereas, Georgia fans were not really bothered by the Luke Ford transfer. Not that they didn't like him as a player and wanted to see him do well, but, Georgia fans felt like his reasoning for wanting to go back to Illinois was fairly sound reasoning. And the fact that the NCAA was so callous to that, you just get all kinds of negative press for that. Eventually that builds up. And everybody beats up on the NCAA. And I guess the one massive criticism I have of the NCAA is this, is there's no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no moral courage. There's no willingness to say, here are the rules. Here's why you believe these rules matter, and we're going to enforce them no matter what people say about us because we believe it's morally the right thing to do. There's no moral courage for the NCAA. The moment they face any kind of criticism for anything, they just sort of cave on it because ultimately the only thing that some of the people at the top of the NCAA believe is it's important they keep their power no matter what. And that's the ultimate criticism I have for the body that is the NCAA. It's sort of this unwieldy behemoth that can kind of be an easy punching bag for people, but it's the absence of moral courage. The fact that they're willing to do whatever they think they can get away with when they think no one's looking, but the moment that they get some attention, they'll just do whatever the mob wants them to do, the masses want them to do. That's the thing about the NCAA that I find so distasteful. Joel Moody on the subject of the Acuna walk-off home run. Boy, that was fun to see last night. That's good times. Good times for sure. Over here on YouTube for a little bit. G. Grace Bama Boy says, Frank, you took our safety and we took the Tennessee linebacker. He says that's a win in the end. Yeah, listen, I've said before, I think that To'o going to Alabama is more about, I think the bigger story there is more about the loss for Tennessee than it is the gain for Alabama, because the assumption I'd make is that Alabama's going to have a good player in that linebacker spot, whether it's a Tennessee transfer or someone else off their roster. Now, I'm sure Alabama fans would say, well, yeah, but this is a guy who's played and experienced, and it's even better than what we would have had. I understand that, but this is more about the struggles of a lesser team trying to keep its players more so than Alabama filling a need, because Alabama typically fills its needs. Robert Barnes says, my concern with Crean is that he isn't recruiting locally good enough to build a solid foundation. That's obviously a fair point. I think the problem there is, and I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff a little bit, but, in the Atlanta area, I live in the Atlanta area, there are so many people who are not from here. And I'm not trying to make excuses. It'll come across like an excuse. But, for a lot of the top talent in the Atlanta area, which is a hotbed for basketball recruiting, it's really been the engine that has fueled Bruce Pearl's career. Recruiting, the Atlanta area, the state of Georgia, has been the thing that Pearl has done, whether he was in Knoxville or now at Auburn. That's been his big thing. You know, a lot of those guys just have no tie to Georgia whatsoever. You know, Georgia's no more important to them than any other school would possibly be. And so I'm not trying to make excuses for why Georgia hasn't, landed those guys, but it does not seem like Georgia has much of a home court advantage in recruiting these, players from Atlanta. There was a time that, maybe Tech did back in the days of when the ACC was kind of a big deal, and, Tech was able to do that. They win the recruitment for, I almost said Sharif Abdur-Rahim, but that didn't happen. He went to Cal. But, they've won some of these recruitments, I guess, over time, maybe a little bit. But it seems like Georgia has had a little bit of a hard time establishing that home court advantage for some of those recruitments. There just doesn't seem to be much of an emotional tie there. I mean, even in the case of Anthony Edwards, I had a chance to talk to Edwards before he came to Georgia. It sort of seemed like that was a lot more about Crean in particular than it was, anything related to Georgia necessarily. Christy checking in the comment section today. People seem glad to have her back, and it's always good to have all of our YouTube commenters back. William Perry, yesterday's Golden Shoe winner, checks in to say Greg Sankey will cave in again after saying last year's immediate transfer was a one-time deal. Yeah, I mean, that's an example of that, William. I think you're right about that. That was not good leadership from the SEC last year to say, oh, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it for just this one time. Once you say anything like that one time, I mean, that's just like the textbook example of weak parenting. We're gonna bend on our principles just this once. No one ever does anything like that just this once, and now it becomes very hard for the SEC to maintain that, given that all the other leagues have kind of done the same thing there. Levi Rushing checking in. Levi, it's great to be able to see you. Mark Abe, yeah. So when I said that about Tech, I started doing the math in my head. You do start to realize a lot of these guys were, Kenny Anderson, New York City, things like that. I was struggling to kind of think of an example where Tech got the Atlanta guy, like Matt Harpering, I guess you'd say that. But you're right, Anderson was from New York, and so you had Marbury was from out, other places there as well. So yeah, that's probably fair. Travis Best was from Massachusetts. That's true. I kind of caught myself on that as I was saying that. Let's see what else. Over here on YouTube, Memphis Dog said, I'd love to have had Toa Toa, even though we didn't really need him. Yeah, I mean, Georgia's very deep at the linebacker spot, but I guess if you have a chance to add a talented player, I guess a lot of times you'd like to do it. Frank Patterson says Chubb and Walker both had 3,000-yard seasons. Yeah, I mean, listen, the Chubb numbers are really pretty spectacular for his career. What is he? Is he fourth all-time in UGA rushing yards? Am I right about that? Pretty spectacular, career for him. Christie says now ESPN is predicting that Jimbo's going to be the one that beats Saban this year. I mean, it is kind of an interesting unofficial race that's going on, right? That next coach to get that win against Saban. And, Ed Orgeron kind of jumped out a couple of years ago and got that, but it didn't really do much with that since then. The 2020 season wasn't great. Now, I expect LSU to kind of bounce back here, but as of now, LSU's not exactly, building off much of that win against Alabama in 2019 that ultimately led to a national championship. But that next coach to get that win against Saban, if you're a Georgia fan, I do kind of think you want it to be Kirby. There's just some prestige there. You don't want it to be, as much as y'all kind of mock me for thinking I talk too much about Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M, here's one of the – I think if you're a Georgia fan, you kind of hope it isn't Jimbo. You hope that maybe Kirby – I should say that Saban keeps that level of prestige and you're able to see Kirby be the guy to get that next win against him. And, at one point in time, it seemed like, Kirby was the coach nipping at Saban's heels after the 2017 season. But – then, Dabo gets another win against him in 2018, and then Orgeron comes back and gets one in 2019. So I do think it's important that Georgia kind of reestablishes itself as that program that's most likely to end the dynasty and the dominance that Alabama has enjoyed. I think that's probably a point worth considering. Jay Shipes on the subject of Kiffin. Yeah, some of y'all like Kiffin more than I do. Jay Shipes also says something interesting about Clemson, which I think is going back to what Chip Patterson said a moment ago, is that, you can go into a season opening game. Florida State did a few years ago against Alabama as, well, this is just going to be a brief, stopover along the way to a playoff appearance for Florida State. They'd won the championship in 13, been back to the playoff again in 14, and yet it just changed just like that. It was never the same again. And has, to this day, still not been the same again. I'm not saying it's going to happen for Clemson that way. Certainly hope it doesn't happen for Georgia that way. But, if Clemson were to lose to Georgia, there's a very good chance they will. If they were to lose to Georgia, that'd be 2 straight losses for Clemson. And a game against Ohio State, they did not look good in. They got beat up by Ohio State, beat up bad there in that game. And conversations in college football can change really quickly. And it's almost like you can't even imagine it beforehand, but you don't really know how people are going to feel after a loss. If Clemson were to lose again, all of a sudden, tough to replace Trevor Lawrence and whatever else. And there's a lot of media people that already don't like Dabo Swinney. They'd love nothing more than to find a reason to ding him. That would be a very popular thing for a lot of national columnists to do. Dabo rubs them the wrong way. So I think the commenter is potentially correct on this, that if Georgia were to get that win, very well likely that they could and would, it could be a very quick change in the conversation around Dabo Swinney at that point in time and the Clemson program. All right, let's see what else. Back on Facebook here for a couple more moments. Matt Rukavina says the NCAA folds faster than Superman on laundry day when challenge never worked with them. Yeah, that's always been my belief, is that, listen, if they're going to come after you, make them prove it. Make them prove it. Shrug your shoulders and say, sorry, our internal investigation turned up nothing, and then just make them prove it after that. Isaac Cruz says, I don't know if I missed this information, but did you hear all the updates with the DB's receiver core? What about the offensive lineman? I'd love to hear updates on how Luke is doing with their offensive line. Past 2 years was kind of a disappointment. Yeah, we've talked to people about this before, about so if wide receivers and quarterbacks are getting chemistry out there in California, how does the offensive line develop the same thing? Because I do believe that offensive line is a chemistry position. And one of the things we've been told is a lot of that for that group may come with how they're working out in the weight room over the course of the summer, and how they develop that bond that way. And clearly it's a very important offseason for the offensive line, because while I'm maybe not quite as concerned as some people are, but that group for Georgia, I certainly understand why the stakes are high for that unit as you come into the upcoming season. So I would agree with your overall premise that if we're talking about chemistry and offensive line working well together, I should say the offense as a whole kind of working well together here this year, the offensive line is clearly a part of that. So, Isaac, I kind of understand where you're coming from on that. Let's see what else. Randy Hall calling for some more transfers. You never know what we might see before it's all said and done. You never know. Bart Brinkley wants to see Georgia blowing some people out this year. Bart, you may get a chance to do that. Hope so anyway. Bobby Powell checking in from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Bobby, glad to have you here today. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm looking forward to some dog football there myself. A couple more and we're going to get ready to wrap up here over on the YouTube side of things. Jay Shipe says you can't compare Dabo Swinney to any SEC coach. I think he and Jordan Bowman are going back and forth on that. I kind of agree with that. Listen, I think that Dabo has validated himself pretty well by the times in which he's beaten Ohio State. Didn't beat him this past time, but he's beaten him before. Beaten Nick Saban now twice. So, Dabo has some big wins. But I think it's very different to say, hey, we can spend an entire season essentially focusing and getting ready for the playoff because we're not going to be challenged as strongly during the regular season. I do think there's a huge difference there. And it's one of the reasons why, some people kind of want to ding Kirby and say, oh, he's only the 7th best coach. But you're basing that on the grind of an SEC. Like, why in the world is Ryan Day, rated ahead of Kirby Smart? What has Day done to prove that he's a better coach than Kirby Smart, other than in some cases playing an easier schedule? So I do think, and obviously I come across as a SEC homer on this. I don't really mind being thought of that way, but I just think this is objectively true, that what an Alabama does in the SEC West is just harder than what most teams have to face. And when Georgia's facing the similar grind, although not in the SEC West, but a similar grind, that is just a harder schedule than what, Lincoln Riley or Ryan Day or Dabo Swinney are being asked to do. Certainly Brian Kelly. We see what happens every time Brian Kelly faces one of these real teams. The results are not pretty. And I do think that I do think that matters. And I don't think in these kinds of conversations that kind of thing ever quite gets enough consideration. All right, let's see what else. Foster Moss says, think about how hard it'd be if you had to get up and do a daily show for Vanderbilt. Yeah. I guess you'd spend the entire show wondering if Vanderbilt was going to show up for its next game or not. I guess that's what that would end up being. I believe that's probably what that would end up being. All right. I think we're going to get ready to go. Hey, good stuff all the way around, everybody. Thank you for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down here today. Please make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will take good care of you. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price that's promised, getting your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs, and everything else that goes along with that. You can check them out online at rsandrews.com. All right. So, good stuff. Hawks getting ready for the playoffs against the Knicks. Check that online. Atlanta Journal-Constitution at ajc.com. Falcons had rookie minicamp going on. You can kind of figure out what the next generation of Falcons look like. As I said before, Ronald Acuna Jr., big-time walk-off home run for the Braves last night. Needed a win bad. They got one thanks to Acuna as the Braves get one over the Mets there last night. Looking forward to the Pirates coming into town starting tomorrow. Georgia getting a baseball series going against Ole Miss. So a lot of stuff online. Atlanta Journal-Constitution at ajc.com. You can read all about that. Thanks for being here today. We will see you back tomorrow, 10 a.m. for Dog Nation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Y'all have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you then.